Now we're back. All right, so technical question. Uh, could you explain more about scraping down after a painting session? I heard of people doing this, but never done it myself. How do you scrape off the ridges without messing up the still wet passages you just painted? Kevin, uh, and I think there's yeah, that's it. Okay. So that's a fairly interesting question for a couple of reasons. I mean, the scraping down ridges. Why do you do it? I mean, they're under Gamel's tutelage. Our model for craftsmanship was the Dutch, and the Dutch model. And I mean, you look at Vermeer, you look at anybody before that. The Dutch model, the surface on a Dutch painting. Here's that famous painting of the painter in his studio, and the surface on those paintings are almost as smooth as this photograph. And that was like the standard. And I'm not going to say it would apply every single time, but when you're a student, and by the way, looking at Paxton's, you look at Paxton's in profile, some of his paintings, the ridges are just huge between repainted passages. And it's not atypical of our way of working. But in areas like that, where that map is in the back, if you move that over a couple times, the whites get thick, and then you build up. They push them through and draw back into them again. They build up again. There's a tendency for paintings to build up thicknesses at what you'd call edges, contrasts where the drawing is, right, where the silhouettes are. There are other tendencies to pick up ridges just because you're using a certain amount of paint. I like that discussion by Ang where he says, his students ask him how much is the right amount. He says use just the right amount of paint. And they said, well, how much is the right amount? And he said, he came out of his building with them, he said at one point, and I think Amari Duvall said that. And he saw a guy painting a house, and he said, that's the right amount of paint. And you can imagine that idea, though, as I think I've mentioned before, that it's like you're trying not to waste paint, but you better darn well cover the thing. And so in our case, though, I think the right amount of paint has everything to do with these transitions. You're going to get ridgy areas if you're painting with really fat whites. And there is a general tendency to be thick in the whites, thin in the darks. It's actually one of those aphorisms, be thick in the lights, thin in the darks. Well, part of that's just because especially if you paint a light over a dark, it's going to get more translucent with time, and you might actually get some of those, an edge like that coming back through. You can find those, as I've said before, in sergeants and anybody who paints directly, you're going to find areas where I would have to say it's something like got lazy, but they suddenly had themselves moving that white over, and then all of a sudden you see this halo where the old shape used to be. And in those areas, you can also have ridges. So if you understand that, but the ridges that are most problematical, and I think they're the ones most discussed by Gamel, were actually the ones that compromised the sense of atmosphere in a shadow area. And so when you have atmosphere, when you have shadows, we have this rule in the basic training that Gamel provided. That's a Boston School thought. But shadows are flat. Shadows are flat as a hat. Why they're flatter than that? And anybody who's worked probably with LAC has heard that. Gamel made these very memorable. That's one of his strengths was this actually finding these, what one of my students called riddles, but finding these axioms in expressions, axiomatic expressions. But they're in expression form. They're already preset. You can just say them over and over again. One of my favorite ones with Gamel was, I must have been really going at it, and being stupid, but he said, to err is human, to err twice is stupid. But axiomatically, right? So it was a clip of words attached together in a memorable way. Some of it humiliating, and others just funny. Like one of them was I stuck in my thumb and pulled out a plum and said, "What a good boy am I?" And what does that have anything to do with? But once you've experienced it, But our game, by the way, Impressionism, is full of that. Getting plums that you don't. Where did you get that? You didn't work to get that. How come you? What are you getting the plums from? And I can't possibly begin to explain that to you. But that's another story for fun. But okay, so what we have here, and I'm wasting an awful lot of time. I hope I can cover this. It's only 5 minutes so far. And by the way, this is my second day on my own. My producer has suggested that we start trying to do this so I can actually come out with more of these. So I can just walk into this room and actually do these things from time to time. And by the way, the producer is Chariot Arts Limited, and up here in northern New Hampshire, please make use of them. I really have appreciated what they've been doing for me, and but and very patiently, I have to say, and I really like the quality of the work. I mean, even what they're getting me to do here, I mean, they got this whole stage set up, so to speak. It's not a stage; it's actually my library, but just above my studio. But let's go back to edges. Anyway, Chariot Arts Limited. Go to Chariot Arts. I think it's chariotarts.com or something, and enjoy. You see some of what he's done. He's fairly young in the business, and significantly self-taught, by the way, but not. But a remarkably sharp learner. All right. Anyway, but very good, very patient. He has a very good ear to what you actually want, that sort of thing. And he's got a very good eye too, by the way, in my view. So, judge of this, the shot here that you're looking at just right now. So, all right, back to the point here. This is about ridges. So, what do I do between sittings? Get back to the question. Let me read it. Could you explain more about scraping down after a painting session? Well, so I'm going to pull out this painting, and it's not wet, so I'm not going to scrape it down. Let me finish this discussion of edges first. I got a different painting here. All these leftovers from another show. I've got this other painting here. Now, this guy named Simons was a friend of Tarbell's, someone of his own era, obviously. And Simons is painting. Now, I was showing you the slick surface of the Rembrandt, the Dutch painting. Well, this is a whole different surface. And I have no way of believing that I can possibly show you this in a way that will give you some idea. I'm just going to try to do this with it. You might be able to get some idea of the ridges. The ridges are everywhere. All of this thing is covered with them. This whole area through here, just ridges everywhere. Even the sky's got ridges in it, ridges everywhere. It's like this painting needs to be put back in its frame. But what we had in our, and by the way, an Impressionist painting, you talk Monet, this stuff is frequently scumbled, and scumbled means putting actually thickish paint down in clumps, and plotzing it along, and then as it's drying, you're setting other notes in and through it, so you're getting these integrated colors that are full strength, but they're peeping in and out of each other. This whole idea of the juxtaposition of color being a factor in getting the most light qualities, very much related to the. Well, it was all back from this, frankly, think about the science at the time. There's another painter or two that were actually doing this before him, and I know I'm talking about Seurat, somebody else, an illustrator. But painting by the spot, and literally meaning much like a camera, if you've looked with one of those lenses at the surface of a magazine article, you can see little dots, and the dots are red, yellow, blue all over the place, in greater and lesser amounts. And I followed that basic fundamental that every area has red, yellow, and blue in it. I mean, it's just part of getting the life in the painting and getting and it just really provides a great way of thinking, a way of approaching actual paint that works really nicely, kind of a methodology. And for the purposes of adjusting colors and keeping on adjusting them. Is it more red? Is it more yellow? Is it more blue? That sort of thing. It begins to be one of these things where you don't mind setting it down there and letting it show. You don't mind if it's a red passage, if it needs more blue, you can set blue into that. But I don't want to make that into something that you then believe at that point will look like a scrabbly surface. It doesn't have to be a scrabbly surface. But if you have this surface, and I'm betting that possibly you can see these ridges on here now, but if you can, I can see them from here, but there's some chance you won't be able to see them from there. What if I try it this way? But anyway, some of these ridges, you'll see ridges like this, like this. If you find a ridge, the kind I just spoke about, where, for example, it'd be along edges like this, and if you had to move this edge, this does not apply to landscape painting, so I'm going to take this away. I'm going to show you the painting I was going to try to show you in the first place. And this is a painting by me. It's a portrait I'm working on at the present time. I don't know if I can get it so you can see this thing. Is that sort of adequate? It's a biggish thing to use in this setting, but it's a portrait of a wonderful lady down in, and I'm working on a series of portraits for her that correspond. How's that? Is that any better? There we go. That's a little better. That correspond with her historical portraits that belong in her family. They're in her family at her house and stuff. So, but what I'm going to show you here, I'm just going to lay this down here now. And I'm going to show you passages, the kind that I'm talking about, and show you how I would approach it. So, for example, if I had a ridge along, let's just say along here. And one of the things I want to say to you is I avoid ridges. I paint with just the right amount of paint, so you don't get ridges in places like this. And I've never done anything to these areas as smooth as anything, these kinds of passages. I'm very thoughtful about what happens over there. So I make sure the amount of paint on either side of that point is just right, so that when I draw it, I can just blow on a sweet transition without ever having to do this ridge thing. But say if you had an area like this, and let's see if you, can you see that? Yeah, I think you might be able to. I'm just guessing that you can see it, but so there's an area right here. See this area right there? So if that area were ridgy, you'd take the whites at the end of a wet day, and you just pull them like this, wipe off your palette knife, push it through again, picking up the paint, taking off the ridge. Okay? Now that's what we're taught by Gamble. Yeah, you would lose a little bit of this quality. You actually could take a dry brush or other means, and you could put it back again if it was hugely problematical and your day hadn't actually ended and you didn't have to leave. But as I said, I've found that if you just practice the art of smooth transitions, but you could, even in this one, you can see that I've got ridges in different places. Now, you get areas that are busy, like in a landscape, and those things aren't going to be as problematical. You also see that people like Sargent and most people painting this way aren't really panicking about it. There's a different, first of all, the big impression is made to be seen from a greater distance. I mean, we want pictures to look good up front and far away. Well, the brush marks that are characteristic of this kind of direct painting, of more impressionistic painting, are half of the beauty, right? And so when you get into this very fine, noodly stuff and using really soft brushes, then you're talking about something a lot more like those Dutch pictures, where the skin really does begin to matter in a different way. I'm not suggesting you should use ridges for the purpose, when you can't, like along a spot like that, where you can't get a light effect, you actually pop up a ridge to get more of a light on a piece of jewelry or something like that. I'm saying one of the things you want to do, don't use ridges that way. It doesn't mean you have to run away from ridges, but if you can't hit that note, you should have set up better. If you can't get that light to glow down there, you should have done a better job of getting your value relationships right. So, yeah. Yeah, I don't know where else I can talk about. In the area of the face, you can see areas in through here where those things could be problems, ridges could be problems. As I said, the biggest worry you have is when you get into an atmospheric shadow. Could be in a spot like this, when all of a sudden you get a secondary ridge all the way through this what would be an atmospheric shadow. And those kinds of places you do have to be quite thoughtful about. So, yeah, and the other kinds of ridges you get, I see them here, that I have strokes from the first lay-in that are ridgier than I thought they were. I didn't see them. One of those things that's very important, actually, at the end of that day is take the painting and look at it in various lights. It's primarily, most paintings are lit from above, so that's the most important thing. Your painting usually from a little to one side and above, and so it's going to look good from those sides, but turn it a different way, because somebody else in their house may light it either from directly above or from one side. So, yeah, I don't know if that covers it. Sorry, I only had this cumbersome painting to show you. And thank you to Dana for letting, I didn't ask her, so I'm thanking her publicly for letting me use her portrait. So let's see, scraping down after a painting session. So as I said, I'm not a big fan of the scraping down. I would also recommend that instead of using a palette knife, that you actually can use a fan brush and just touch it along these edges. Keep, of course, clean the paint off, touch it again, and lose those ridges that way, depending on how thick they really are, right? But yeah. It actually was never a bad look, by the way, even when we scraped the whites into the darks and wound up with that little edge of midtone there. It was actually quite something very pleasant to paint into the next day, oddly enough, if you didn't put it back together that same day. But just consider edges as you go, because they have the potential of actually causing problems in terms of the visual impression. And so, yeah. All right. I think that covers it. Thank you for that question, Kevin. Yeah, I think that really is entirely it. Can I just get 2 more seconds on something else? I mean, it's going to be 2 more minutes, I know. But Richard asked about, he said, in my description in the example, he said it was necessary to wet up both sides to make a joint. And he was talking about wet into dry painting. And I think I need to talk about this because it's not going to take even 2 minutes probably. So I just wanted to say, though, that if you had a dark area like this and a light area like this, and it's a painting sitting here, and you have to move this thing over, So you want this to be a wet into wet joint because you won't get the edge quality if you just go over there with this dragging, nasty thing. But a wet into wet joint is actually a sort of a standard of the trade. And and the old argument is if you're not painting wet into wet, you're not painting at all. So, so the fundamental thing though is how do you create buffer joints, right? So you have to learn to hit this note right on the money. If you can't do that, learn to do it, right? And I said that before. And the same thing over here, you find some area where if you come over, there's going to be a place, say if it's this black thing, you'll want to work on this black. You don't want to have to come back and paint all this stuff again and all this stuff again and all this stuff over again. So you want to move this joint over, just learn to hit this note and then mix that note. And what you want to do is find somewhere in the middle here where you've matched dead on the paint. And so his question was, do you then feather it out? And the short answer is you can if you want. I mean, if you need to, feather it out. If you don't need to, and you do need to if it creates a ridge of its own, right? But if you don't need to, it's fine. Just let it be. Just as I said, if you use the right amount of paint, it should actually sort of rather blend. By just the use of the brush, it should rather blend. But there's nothing about feathering out that's a bad thing. If you're missing a note, feathering it out won't hide your sins. Okay, if you missed the match. All right. So those were 2 points I covered in that bit of time, and thank you all for your. I see that you're all interested in the technical aspects of this just by the numbers of people watching. So it doesn't mean that's all I'm about. I mean, but on the other hand, I'm here for you, and I'm a craftsman. I'm more, I happen to have a good theoretical sense of this stuff too, and a pretty darn good education, but long experience. So I'm happy to be of service to you. I wish you all well in your careers, and I hope these continue to be of use. Anyway, so thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and make comments or questions. All right? I'll look for them. See you next time.